It was a cold, foggy night in the remote mountain town of Ravensbrook. The wind howled through the narrow streets, carrying with it an eerie silence that made the townsfolk uneasy. There was something about this night that felt different and sinister, even the kind of night where stories are born and legend are made. The Ravensbrook Express was the town's lifeline to the outside world. A majestic train carved its way through the rugged mountain landscape, connecting the isolated town with the bustling cities beyond. But tonight, the train was running late, and the station master, old Mr. Hale, was growing more anxious by the minute. Mr. Hale stood on the empty platform, his breath visible in the cold air. He checked his pocket watch for the 10th time in as many minutes. The train was now over an hour late. This had never happened before, not on his watch. The station was deserted, except for a lone figure that emerged from the shadows. It was a tall man in a long dark coat, his face obscured by the brim of his hat. He approached Mr. Hale with a deliberate, almost predatory stride. "Evening, Mr. Hale," the man said in a low, gravelly voice. "You're waiting for the train, are you?" Mr. Hale nodded, not recognizing the stranger but feeling an unsettling chill run down his spine. "Yes, it's late, very late." The stranger smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe it won't be coming tonight." "What do you mean?" Mr. Hale asked, a note of alarm creeping into his voice. But the stranger didn't answer. He simply tipped his hat and walked away, disappearing into the fog as mysteriously as he had appeared, disturbed. Mr. Hale retreated into his small office at the station. He tried calling the neighboring stations, but there was no response. It was as if the train had vanished off the face of the earth. As the hours ticked by, the fog grew thicker, enveloping the station and the tracks in a ghostly shroud. Just when Mr. Hale was about to give up hope, he heard the distant, familiar sound of a train whistle. The Ravensbrook Express was finally approaching. He rushed out to the platform, the sound of the train growing louder, the ground vibrating beneath his feet. But something was wrong. The whistle was off-key and distorted. The sound of the engine was different, more of a groan than a chug out of the fog. The train emerged, but it was not the Ravensbrook Express Mr. Hale knew. The once gleaming silver locomotive was now dull and rusted, its windows dark and lifeless. It rolled to a stop in front of the station with a screech that set Mr. Hale's teeth on edge. The doors slid open with a creak, but no one stepped out. Peering into the dimly lit carriages, Mr. Hale could see that the train was empty. Or so it seemed. Gathering his courage, he stepped onto the train. The interior was even more disturbing. The seats were torn, and the cushioning stained with dark patches that looked suspiciously like blood. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and an unnatural cold seeped into his bones. As Mr. Hale made his way through the carriages, he felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He wasn't alone. There was something or someone watching him. He could feel eyes on him, though he saw no one. Then, as he reached the last carriage, he saw them. Shadowy figures, barely visible, sitting in the seats, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. They were whispering, their voices overlapping in a sinister chorus, but he couldn't make out the words. The figures seemed to flicker in and out of existence, like the remnants of a bad dream. Heart pounding, Mr. Hale backed away, turning to flee the train. But as he did, he saw the tall stranger from earlier standing at the end of the carriage, his smile now a cruel sneer. "Leaving so soon, Mr. Hale?" the stranger taunted, his voice echoing unnaturally in the enclosed space. Mr. Hale tried to run, but his legs felt like lead. The train seemed to stretch on forever, and the exit was impossibly far away. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling his head with suffocating pressure. Finally, he burst out of the train, stumbling onto the platform and gasping for breath. The fog was thicker than ever, swirling around him like a living entity. The train let out another distorted whistle before slowly pulling away, disappearing back into the night. But as it vanished into the fog, Mr. Hale realized something horrifying. The station around him had changed. The buildings were crumbling, covered in vines and rotting. The lights were dim and flickering, and the air was filled with the scent of damp earth and decay. This wasn't the Ravensbrook station, he knew. It was as if he had been transported to another time and another place, one where the line between the living and the dead was perilously thin. Suddenly, the fog parted, revealing a group of figures standing on the platform. They were ghostly, their faces pale, and their clothes old-fashioned, as if they belonged to another era. Among them, he recognized the faces of passengers who had once taken the Ravensbrook Express, passengers who had vanished without a trace. Years ago, one of the figures, a young woman with hollow eyes, stepped forward and whispered, "Welcome to the last stop, Mr. Hale. We've been waiting for you." Panic surged through him as he realized the truth. He had boarded a ghost train, and now he was trapped in a place where time and reality no longer mattered. The fog closed in again, and as it did, the figures moved closer, their cold, ghostly hands reaching out for him. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. The last thing he saw was the dark figure of the stranger, watching from the shadows, his smile wide and victorious, and then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything went black. The next morning, the townsfolk of Ravensbrook awoke to find the station deserted. There was no sign of Mr. Hale or the Ravensbrook Express. The only clue to what had happened was a single rusted railway spike lying on the platform, covered in a fine layer of dust, as if it had been there for years. The Ravensbrook Express and its station master had vanished without a trace, becoming just another legend in a town filled with mystery. To this day, on foggy nights, some say you can still hear the distant whistle of the train, echoing through the mountains, a ghostly reminder of a journey that never truly ended. What happened to Hale? Mr. Hale, the station master of Ravensbrook, was ultimately trapped in a supernatural realm, a ghostly echo of the real world, where time and reality are distorted. When he boarded the Eerie rusted train, he unknowingly crossed into this otherworldly dimension. The ghostly figures he encountered on the train were the spirits of past passengers who had vanished under mysterious circumstances. They were stuck in this liminal space between life and death, a purgatory of sorts, waiting for new souls to join them. When Mr. Hale tried to escape, he found that the world around him had changed. The once familiar Ravensbrook station had decayed into a shadow of its former self, overgrown and abandoned, as if it had been forgotten by time. The figures he saw on the platform were the lost souls, including passengers from long ago who had also boarded the Ravensbrook Express, never to be seen again. By the end of the tale, it's implied that Mr. Hale himself has become one of these lost souls, trapped forever in this spectral dimension. His final moments were consumed by terror as the ghostly figures closed in on him, and the dark figure of the stranger, who may have been a malevolent spirit or even the conductor of this cursed journey, sealed his fate. In the end, Mr. Hale disappeared just like the others, leaving no trace behind, except for the haunting presence that lingers in the foggy nights of Ravensbrook, forever echoing the mystery of the vanished train and its passengers.